My name is Coco Iwamoto. I'm with the Chamber of Sustainable Commerce, and I'm honored to moderate this discussion. Um, it's featuring Paul Bernstein, researcher at UHERO and Carbon Cashback Hawaii, and also David Mulinix with Greenpeace Hawaii. Our speakers will present the pros and cons on a bill labeled Carbon Cashback that will be introduced at the State Legislature this session. And so thank you so much for joining us and being willing to learn more about this issue and the issues that are impacted. Carbon cashback is not cap and trade, and it is not a simple gasoline tax. Carbon cashback increases the barrel tax, which is the fee put on importers of fossil fuels and fossil energy producers, for example, refineries. The government collects these revenues and then returns all of these revenues to the people, less a small administrative fee. The revenues are returned via a refundable tax credit and in equal shares so that each adult receives a full share and each minor receives or dependent receives half a share. So the cashback is independent of one's income. Every adult receives the same amount of cashback from the government. And so that's the premise of the bill that is the topic of this discussion. So each of the gentlemen will have 15 minutes to make an opening statement, and we'll begin with Paul.
Okay, thanks, Kim, and thanks also. Let me extend my thank you for everyone joining today on a Saturday afternoon. As Kim said, I work at UHERO as a researcher and also with the Carbon Cashback Group. And let me just try and share my screen here. So hopefully folks can see that. So let me just give a little bit of background about who we are at Carbon Cashback Hawaii. We're a passionate group of environmentalists that see climate change as the most pressing issue and as an existential threat. We support policies that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions effectively, efficiently, and equitably, and are politically viable. In doing our work, we take the most generous approach to other people as possible, namely appreciation, gratitude, and respect. We listen, we work to find common ground, and we endeavor to understand our own biases, which is a lot of the reason why we're here today, actually. Our approach is based on building consensus, as we believe that that is the best chance for an enduring policy, and we work with the legislature on these policies. And now, okay. There we go. Okay. So I think all of us are here because we believe climate change is an existential threat. Furthermore, I think we would all agree that fossil fuel emissions are the #1 cause of climate change. I think where we differ is in our preferred set of policies for addressing climate change. The Carbon Cashback Hawaii hopes this discussion will help people see why we believe carbon cashback should be part of the solution set of policies to address climate change. But let me be clear, Carbon Cashback Hawaii, our group, we believe a suite of policies are needed to address greenhouse gas emissions. So we don't see carbon cashback as a silver bullet. And if we're going to address emissions, but if we are going to address emissions most effectively, efficiently, and equitably, carbon cashback needs to be included in the suite of policies. So what is carbon cashback? Kim gave a brief description. Let me amplify it a bit. So the main purpose of the carbon cashback bill is to reduce pollution caused by the use of fossil fuels while financially protecting vulnerable households. The bill amends the existing barrel tax by simply increasing its rate over time. So in the first year, the fee that importers of fossil fuels and fossil fuel producers would pay increases by 5 cents a gallon from where it is today, or basically $2.10 a barrel or $6 a metric ton of CO2. The next year, the fee would increase by another 5 cents, and then for the next 8 years by 10 cents. So after 10 years, the additional fee on importers and fossil fuel producers would be about 90 cents a gallon, or basically $100 a metric ton of CO2. So the importers of fossil fuel and fossil fuel producers would surely pass some of this fee on to consumers, leading to an increase in the price of fossil fuels. This increase in price would make renewables and clean energy technologies more attractive. As the fee continues to rise, and with the expectation of this increase, the demand for fossil energy would decline, leading to a reduction in CO2 emissions. Okay, but to protect vulnerable households from the resulting rise in energy costs, the policy refunds all the revenues collected by the government, less an administrative fee, to people in equal shares. That is, every adult, regardless of income, receives the same dividend or cash back. Since lower income households have less money, live in smaller homes, have fewer cars, and overall just use less energy, they will pay less in increased energy costs. But again, everyone receives the same amount, so the net financial position of low-income households will be better than that of higher-income households. Therefore, the method of refunding the revenues makes the policy progressive. So you can think of this bill as combining a charge on polluting with an equal distribution refund mechanism that results in a progressive policy. To help give an intuition around why the bill is progressive, the following figure is designed for that, to give some intuition. So the pie charts divide the population into 5 equal groups of households. So each quintile here, or slice, represents a group of the same number of households, from lowest income to highest income. The figure compares the share of the tax burden paid by each quintile, that's the pie chart on the right here, with the share of carbon revenues received by each quintile, which is the pie chart on the left. Now, this comparison is for a national carbon fee and dividend policy, but the idea holds for Hawaii. In fact, Hawaii would be better off, as I'll show in the next slide. The other thing to remember is all the revenues collected go back to citizens. So the size of the pie, whatever that may be, is the same. So the carbon tax burden pie shows that the highest income households will take on 51% of the burden, compared to the lowest income households, which take on only 3.2% of the burden. This means that on average, the highest income households will pay about 16 times more in carbon fees passed on to consumers, because they generally buy far more goods and services than lower income folks. But as the carbon revenue distribution pie shows, everyone receives the same check from the government. So again, remember, all the tax revenues are returned to households, so the size of the pies are the same. For the lowest quintile, it pays 3.2% of the burden, but receives 20% of the revenues. Or on average, the lowest income household receives 6 times more than it pays. On the other end of the spectrum, the wealthiest households receive about 40 cents for each dollar that they pay. But this is fair, as it is the highest income households that are responsible for more of the carbon pollution. Okay, so over the 2020 to 2021 timeframe, UH Economics Research Organization conducted 2 studies on the economic and environmental impacts of Hawaii implementing a price on carbon. These figures compare the impacts of Hawaii continuing with a business as usual, in other words, no carbon pricing policy, versus a scenario with a carbon price. So the top line in the figure represents the emissions, Hawaii's emissions, CO2 emissions in a business as usual scenario, compared to a scenario in which Hawaii implements basically a carbon cash program, which imposes a $50 carbon price in 2025, increasing to $70 by 2045, all in 2012 dollars. The upper line on the first figure shows the CO2 emissions in Hawaii under the baseline, as I mentioned, and the bottom, the carbon cashback. So the majority of the drop in emissions in the baseline from 15.8 to 11.1 comes about because of the state's renewable portfolio standard. Therefore, carbon cashback has the greatest impact on emissions from the non-electric sectors. The drop in emissions is significant because the policy addresses emissions economy-wide. It addresses emissions from existing capital and new capital in all sectors of the economy. For example, when it comes to personal travel, carbon cashback would cause people to use their existing gasoline-powered vehicles less and purchase lower-emitting vehicles. The study found that this policy would reduce cumulative emissions over the 2025 to 2045 timeframe by 10% from where they would have been without the policy, which equates to taking 400,000 gasoline-powered vehicles off of our roads. The bar chart shows on the right-hand side the percentage change in household consumption for the 5 income quintiles in the study. As you can see, on average, all households financially benefit, thanks in large part to the visitors who also pay their fair share but receive none of the cash back. Importantly, the policy is progressive, with lower income households gaining much more than higher income households. So coming about from the study, the Tax Review Commission, which commissioned the second study, the 2020-2022 Tax Review Commission's #1 recommendation was for Hawaii to impose a carbon tax to incentivize moving away from carbon-based fuels and adopting clean energy. They also went on to recommend that the majority of the proceeds be rebated as a cashback to the residents of Hawaii with a disproportionate distribution to low-income households. Further in support of carbon cashback, the recently released Hawaii State Energy Office's decarbonization study recommended elements or the key elements of the carbon cashback policy, namely putting an increasing fee on fossil fuel products to reduce demand and taking some of those revenues and paying them in the form of dividends directly to residents to provide relief to low and moderate income households. This was further supported by Leah Laramie in the Thursday AEN EEP informational briefing, in which she also called out carbon cashback explicitly to be one of the policies that the legislature passes in this 2024 session for Hawaii to meet its long-term emissions. Sorry, can somebody? So there are many advantages to carbon cashback. Hopefully, you're seeing with the progressivity. So let me just rattle through these. First, it reduces emissions efficiently. Carbon cashback directly addresses the source of the carbon emissions rather than a proxy for these emissions. Furthermore, it addresses these emissions economy-wide so that the emission reductions will occur in the part of the economy where they are most cost-effective. Third, it complements and reinforces existing environmental policies. For example, the carbon fee increases the effectiveness of efficiency standards by increasing the incentive for consumers to purchase more energy-efficient products. Next, it's good for the pocketbook, as the previous figure showed. The policy generates an annual dividend or carbon cashback payment for every Hawaii resident to spend with no restrictions. The average low and middle income household will financially benefit most. It also accounts for visitors, for the emissions for which they're responsible. So it acts a bit like a green fee, as visitors would pay for any increases in energy that importers and producers pass on, and these fees would be returned to Hawaii residents. It's also politically durable once it's put in place because of the dividend. So once people receive their annual dividend checks, it will be very difficult for a legislator to rescind this policy for fear of not being elected. It's also very easy to implement and has little administrative burden. The carbon cashback leverages the existing regulatory infrastructure, namely the barrel tax, and takes advantage of refundable tax credits, which already exist, and DOT knows very well how to administer. Last, returning to our vision of what we need on a global scale, Hawaii implementing carbon cashback would build political will and momentum for the US to implement this effective policy, just as Hawaii has influenced other states to adopt policies such as 100% RPS. And this would give us an opportunity to join Canada and the EU, which are also pricing carbon and seeing success with their programs. And speaking of that success, a study done by Duke University found that British Columbia, which employed basically carbon cashback back in 2008, found that in the first years of the policies, it reduced greenhouse gas emissions from 5 to 15%. Another study found that when the carbon tax increased from $10 to $40 per ton in 2019, carbon emissions declined by 12%, twice as fast as the rest of the nation. The popularity of this policy has been shown in other studies because 80% of the residents come out ahead in British Columbia. Another country, Sweden, implemented a carbon fee in 1991 that has caused their emissions to decline by 25%, while at the same time, their gross domestic product has grown by 60%. And for another example, carbon pricing encourages investment and innovation in clean energy solutions. The European Union's carbon price has been cited as one of the main reasons electric vehicle penetration in Europe far exceeds that in the US. With that, I'd like to conclude before I'd like to turn it over to Helen Cox to take the rest of my time after this. So carbon cashback, as I said, will reduce greenhouse gas emissions effectively and efficiently. And because of the dividend, it enables an equitable transition to a clean energy future. And last, it allows Hawaii to lead the fight against climate challenge. Mahalo for your time, and I'll turn it over to Helen.
Thank you, Paul. How much time is Paul sharing with Helen?
Just a minute or so. So thank you, Paul. Yeah, I'm not going to argue for carbon cashback so much as explain why I'm part of carbon cashback. I think Paul did a good job, and I'm sure there'll be questions that will be answered later. But, you know, like all of you, I feel passionately about this earth and the people on the earth and the diversity of this planet. And I'm particularly concerned about my grandchildren, and I want to make sure that they get a place, and inherit an earth that is sustainable, livable, and that they can thrive. But I think the reason that I am focused on carbon cashback is because I'm the ex-chancellor of Kauai Community College. And so therefore, I worked with students and their families who are in those lower quintiles. They are people who are struggling. They are the ones who need a loan. One of the reasons they come to community college is because it's less expensive. They can get more of their education in the first 2 years without paying the high prices of the 4-year universities. So I'm seeing both their passion for doing something as well as the struggle that they're going through in order to get to feel like something is getting done. And so carbon cashback seems to be to not put the burden on them. It actually is an equitable process. And yet at the same time, it provides a way to transition that seems viable. I mean, ideally, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to stop all fossil fuels tomorrow. I'd like to, and I believe that there are other things that we should be doing. I'm actually one of those people who goes out and marches and holds signs. And I'm also somebody who believes we should stop subsidies and lots of other things. But I believe that this is a viable, effective, efficient policy that will, in fact, bring carbon emissions down and will help people make that transition and help particularly the people that I've been working with. Mahalo.
Thank you, Helen. Now for Dave Mulinix to share his opening statement.
Okay, here we go. Share screen. Are we shared? Oh, wait, we're not there. Presenter. Share. Okay, are we shared? Oh. I'm not seeing my notes.
Okay, when you close it out and try to open it again.
Hang on, sorry.
You
Just
stop sharing your screen and try to
stop
launch it
sharing.
again. You gonna help?
Yeah, why don't you help me here, Sherry? My technical advisor.
Okay, so from Zoom, let's go back to Zoom.
Yeah.
Click on the Zoom tab.
Yeah.
And you're gonna share your screen.
Yeah.
And then select Chrome.
Yeah.
And then this presentation.
Yeah.
And share. And then go ahead and click on the
Oh.
arrow.
Now I do slideshow.
There you go. Okay.
Okay. Hope everyone can see that.
Yes.
Here we go. We're in a climate crisis and we need to act like it. NOAA and NASA have confirmed the last decade was the hottest in human history. The UN Secretary General has declared the era of global boiling has arrived. We are on a highway to climate hell. Climate change has been described as atmospheric cancer. Back in the 70s, when we first saw pollution having a serious impact on our atmosphere, that was like being diagnosed with stage 1. Advance the clock, and we're now at stage 4, a climate tipping point. The steps we take in stage 1 are different than the steps we take in stage 4. We all agree we must address global warming by weaning our state off fossil fuels. So what is our best way forward? Today, I'll share some findings about carbon taxes, why these policies are a concern and don't necessarily meet our need in stage 4. Carbon cashback is a market-based approach that assumes the market delivers the most optimal solution that could ever be achieved by policy or planning. This approach uses taxes instead of emission limits to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. Evidence shows this approach won't achieve the goal, and in some instances, the market worsens the problem. Putting faith in market solutions to deliver change or how we power our world is dangerous. Markets are not and have never been moral structures. They do not exist to protect our common resource or promote equality. They only exist to make a profit. That's their only reason. Carbon taxes are levied on petroleum distributors who will pass increased costs on to families. Without reasonable alternatives, families will be stuck with higher energy costs. And for those that file taxes and they'll hope to recoup expenses in their tax rebate, this means that not only will fossil fuel companies get to keep polluting, but they'll get to pass the cost of polluting onto families. Let's examine some of the claims that are being made. Carbon cashback claims purchasing power of lower and middle-income households will increase because rebates will be greater than increased costs from fossil fuel use. However, we did a sample real-world scenario to check the math and came up with a different conclusion. When the carbon cashback tax is fully implemented, and if you're an individual renting, living in Waianae, working in Honolulu, by the end of the year, you'll have spent an additional $719.28 because of the carbon tax, just to go to work, not counting other driving you do. However, the tax credit at the end of the would only come out to $646. If the only way to get to work is to drive, folks who will drive no matter what gas costs, they're having difficulty making ends meet. Anything that adds to their cost of living is a burden. Bottom line, emissions won't fall, but prices will rise. Obviously, there will be scenarios where individuals come out ahead or even break even, but a point that must be made is that folks shouldn't accept these claims and projections at face value and really think about the consequences of this proposed policy. So despite the carbon cashback actual won't benefit low-income families, the tax doesn't address the infrastructure needs for a low-carbon economy. Without the system in place in our communities to support making a transition like public transportation, adequate public EV charging systems, we're putting the cart before the horse by creating this tax. We don't have the means to transition. The amount that may get is not sufficient to help upfront costs to make a transition. And if you're a renter or live in a condo, transitioning is not even within your control. You can't just install solar panels or put an EV charger where you live, where you rent. Another claim addresses emission reductions. In testimony, carbon cashback proponents that it will reduce carbon emissions by 10%. It's important to note that the main time frame here is 20 years. So this means projections for the reduction amount is only 0.5% per year, which does not even come close to meeting the needs of the carbon reductions we need to make. Importantly, the emissions data used in the UHERO report does not include emissions from waste energy or biofuels in their projections, and that's kind of concerning. The carbon tax helps fossil fuel industry shift the responsibility for climate change from fossil fuel companies to customers. Essentially, all the various carbon pricing plans give the fossil fuel industry a way to pay a nominal fee or a tax to continue to pollute, legitimizing their ability to continue to pollute. This gives them immunity to do so while they pass the fee on to consumers. A fee or tax condones an activity. This is important. A fine or a prohibition makes that activity illegal. By putting a tax on carbon legalizes pollution. I doubt very much anyone in Hawaii would think that we should be dealing with the Red Hill fuel leak crisis or PFAS in our drinking water by putting a price on a gallon of jet fuel or PFAS in our water and then use that money to fix our water infrastructure in the years to come. We'd all be pretty incensed by that proposal. It's important to remember that much of the pollution caused by CO2 emissions already happens prior to it being used by consumers. We're talking about carbon taxes. We're talking about doing something after the fact, after the fossil fuel pollution has been taken out of the ground, after all the pollution emitted from the entire well-to-wheel process is already out there. So by the time we get to a tax on it, a huge amount of the destruction has already been done. So we're talking about not actually stopping or keeping fossil fuels in the ground. We're talking about a Band-Aid. Let's consider actual data from existing carbon taxes and look at Sweden, which is considered a carbon tax success story. According to a report in 2016, the effects of the carbon tax on fossil fuel consumption has resulted in a rise of using biomass for energy from 25% in 1990 to up to 70% now in 2020. Despite the burning of biomass for electricity being worse than coal, emissions from the use of biofuels like wood, biogas, etc., are reported as biogenic carbon dioxide emissions, and according to international regulations, they're not counted as part of the total greenhouse gas emissions. Clearly, some of the emission reduction attributed to Sweden are a result of some creative accounting. They're switching from burning fossil fuels to biomass and not counting those climate-wrecking CO2 emissions. Sweden is among many that have imposed the carbon tax and also politically defined tree-based electricity to be carbon neutral. It's important to point out the carbon neutral definition also influences projections in the UHERO report that our carbon cashback bill is based on. In the report, it specifies that they don't include emissions from waste energy nor the biofuels in their projections. So let's keep in mind we're considering emission projection claims. In real-world case of Sweden, we find the carbon tax elevates and favors fossil solutions. By punishing fossil fuels, carbon tax puts things like nuclear power, biomass, waste energy incineration as a competitive advantage. In the Citizens Climate Lobby Revenue Report, it even helped put natural gas ahead of coal, ignoring the methane impacts that makes it worse than coal. You can't count on a market to pick up clean solutions like conservation, efficiency, wind, solar, energy storage, or cheap from polluting false solutions, most of which are worse than coal for global warming. Burning biomass is climate wrecking. This is not a good path forward. Carbon tax proponents acknowledge the government making environmental harmful energy choices is possible, outcome as the result of the tax, but sidestepping the issue simply suggests that this problem can be addressed later in a separate legislation is not a good plan. So do carbon pricing plans like carbon tax actually cut CO2 emissions? That claims that carbon taxes are more efficient and least cost solution to address the climate crisis are contradicted by the evidence that carbon taxes are deemed consistently too low to work. And they're not robust in their results in sufficiently cutting carbon tax emissions. Peer-reviewed research paper, all 37 studies that assess the actual effects of carbon pricing policy of emissions on reductions. The author concluded that overall, aggregate reductions from carbon pricing has a limited impact on emissions, generally between 0 and 2% per year. The author sums it up stating, we've now had 30 years experience of carbon pricing and not a hell of a lot to show for it. Here's an example of data shows regarding carbon emissions from a government that has implemented the carbon tax. Looking at the British Columbia data, data shows that carbon emissions have actually not changed much since the tax was implemented in 2008. After 14 years, they've only reduced emissions by 2.8%. And that includes significant drop in emissions during the 2008 global recession and the COVID pandemic in 2020. Carbon taxes in BC have become quite controversial. A 2023 poll showed that more than 3 in 5, 62% of British Columbians say the carbon tax has negatively affected their finances of their households, up 26% since 2020. A 2018 study analyzed the impact on carbon taxes on food prices and consumption patterns in Canada. The findings suggest that the carbon tax has negative impacts on both food prices and food consumption patterns. According to the Ontario Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association, the reality is the carbon tax stresses margins for everyone up and down the food chain. This makes Canadian farmers less competitive against imports, as asparagus competes with Mexican products that had a lower impact cost because of the implementation of the tax. The unintended result would be higher carbon output from more imports being hauled into Canada by boat, plane, and truck. It illustrates how carbon tax hurts local businesses. Lessons for Hawaii: a carbon tax will increase the disadvantage of local produce foods as compared to imported foods, where neither the embedded emissions or the emissions from the shipping of the product to Hawaii are taxed. Policymakers in Canada now acknowledge that carbon tax is creating barriers that prohibits transitioning to clean energy. Realizing the carbon tax on heating oil is punishing families without providing a viable way to transition to cleaner choices, in October 2023, the Canadian government removed the heating oil for 3 years from the carbon tax. This following public pressure from the Atlantic province that uses oil as a prominent heating source for their region. In addition to removing the tax on heating oil for 3 years, the government announced that they will be offering a program to make the average heat pump free for low and medium income Canadians to help them make the transition to cleaner, more affordable home heating. Great example of how government can lead and provide the necessary incentive and support the transition that is needed. They realized finally that they put the cart before the horse. Carbon tax doesn't make polluters pay for greenhouse gas pollution. It makes end users pay. A regulatory solution that phases out fossil fuel extraction and use can have and has been successful in the past to penalize those who are responsible for the problem, not everyone else. Carbon cashback proponents, however, say that a ban or a prohibition on fossil fuels is politically untenable. However, history doesn't really support that theory. Back in the 1960s, we had similar environmental pollution crisis with massive fish die-offs, rivers on fire, a depleting ozone layer. In response, Congress passed a series of environmental laws like the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts with strict mandates that penalize polluters. These laws have been extremely effective in turning around a lot of our environmental problems into the 2000s. Unfortunately, politicians have been shifting away from proven successful regulatory mandates to embrace market-based solutions that place the burdens on consumers instead of industry. Their message to consumers is, you can just shop your way out of your problems, just make the right choices. Problem is, this creates inequalities, an undue burden on consumers because they don't control the choices that they have. Industry and government do. And this market-based approach has resulted in 40 years of massive income inequality and environmental injustice. So this notion that a ban or a prohibition on the use of fossil fuels is politically untenable doesn't hold up. Here in 2022, California passed a law prohibiting the sale of new gas-powered cars after 2035. Following California's lead, 11 additional states have also committed to gas car phase out by 2035. And Washington jumping in to a further step, enacting a law with a target of 2030 that all new cars be electric, with a mandate for all government planning meet that target. To circle back to the beginning of this discussion, we're in the middle of a situation where we have atmospheric cancer, and we are in stage 4. Our life support system is showing signs of collapsing all around us. 2023 was the world's hottest year, shattering previous records. Global temperatures in 2023 have already risen to nearly 1.5 degrees Celsius. Scientists have already described how unfriendly a 1.5 degree world will be. At this point in the climate crisis, 0.5% a year reduction in CO2 emissions seems a little bit too late, especially considering the additional negative effects expected, such as financially hurting families and local businesses, including farms, punishing consumers before viable alternatives are available or the infrastructure isn't built out. This means emissions don't fall, prices will rise. It's very concerning that carbon cashback is giving climate harming energy sources a competitive advantage. We are past the time where we can wait for the market to have an effect. That ship sailed. We know what needs to be done. We just need to build a political will to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. Earlier, we considered asking some questions that we prepared. However, hearing their substantive presentations, both from Dave and Paul, and seeing all the questions coming in from the chat, and they both also indicated that your questions were more important than the questions that we came up with. I'm going to head straight to questions, and I'm going to start with questions for Paul, since his presentation went first. And I believe Representative Iwamoto had a question about one of the slides presented by Paul, specifically asking about what about those who don't file taxes? How are they to, I guess the question is, how are they to get the money back to them that they paid because of the tax?
Thank you. That's an excellent question, and it's a concern of ours, which is why in the latest bill, we have a set aside for money that would hopefully be used for exactly that purpose. And I would add, also help, there are a number of other refundable tax credits that low-income folks fail to file for because they don't know how to file taxes or what have you. And I don't know if Ruth Robeson is on this or would like to speak to it, but she has firsthand experience with exactly this issue, working with the League of Women Voters, I believe it is, in trying to help people file taxes who generally don't file taxes. So yes, that is a legitimate concern, and we're trying to address it in the bill. And Ruth, if you're there and want to add, please do.
Well, thank you, Paul, and everyone for being here. I have volunteered with the AARP tax volunteer program, and we've had people who make very little income come in and get their taxes, get help with their taxes so they can get the food and I forget what it's called now, tax credit back. It's about $85. And so I think that, you know, this increases the incentive to come in and get help with your taxes.
Okay, thank you. I do want to be fair and go to a question, you know, for Dave about his presentation. There's a lot of statements and I'm trying to look for the question in the chat, and I apologize. If somebody wants to highlight a question, like you want a clarification. And actually I have while we're waiting, do you mind if I ask mine? Dave, you showed a slide that said, I think it was in British Columbia, perhaps, that the baseline was in 2007. And there wasn't much of an increase up until recently. And to me, I'm like, well, are we missing the upward trajectory that would have happened? Because it said there was only a 2% reduction from 2007. But I'm imagining the trajectory would have continued to have gone up, but one would argue, but for the intervention of the cashback for them. Is that making any sense?
Well, maybe, but in 2008, we had a recession. So that had an effect on bringing down their emissions. And then we had COVID, which had an effect on bringing down emissions. But overall, you know, as the trend has gone, it's pretty much flat. It hasn't really had a great success in actually bringing down emissions. the problem is there's multiple folks that are doing studies and such, but their projections, et cetera. And so that's why I talked about the 37 studies that looked at every one of the ones that we actually looked at. What were the results? What were the results? Were the results successful in bringing down emissions? And from her studies, of all 37 studies, peer-reviewed study, it was only 0 to 2%. And so overall, it doesn't seem to be working.
Okay, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask a question from a legitimate viewer for Dave. Question for Dave. You said that, and this is from John Kawamoto. Sorry. You said that carbon cashback would legalize pollution. Would it stop the thinning County of Honolulu's lawsuit against the oil companies?
Well, I'm not an attorney. I don't think so. No, I don't think so. Basically, see what you're doing is, like I said in that other slide, and maybe Henry wants to answer this one. He's got this really down well. But when you do a fee or a tax, you're then saying that this is now legal. You can now do this, but you're going to have to pay a tax to do it. So carbon cashback is saying, okay, you can continue to pollute as long as you pay us a fee. Now, if it's illegal, then you fine the person or you penalize them, you put them in jail. That's how you do with something that's illegal. So it's illegal, like we have a lot of laws that say it's illegal to pollute our water and air. And these are very specific laws. So that's really, I think if carbon cashback really wanted to be successful, they should, instead of saying a tax, it should be a fine to penalize the fossil fuel companies for poisoning us. Then make them stop.
So I'm sorry, Dave, were you sharing some of your time with Henry Curtis?
Oh, Henry, did you want to comment to that?
No, I think you described it very well. What the carbon tax is a market-based capitalistic solution that has, if it works, has minimal impact and will not save us as emissions rise. However, if we were to double the RPS tomorrow, that would have far greater impact.
Thank you, Henry. Henry did ask a question while Paul was presenting. Henry's question is, if locals get money from visitors, what do they spend it on? And will that spending have an impact, I guess, on greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Henry. I agree that there would be a small rebound effect, but that money presumably could also help these households, all households, take that money and transition to cleaner options, especially as they see the price increase over time. They're going to want to move in, want to use that capital, use that money for cleaner technologies and ultimately reduce their emissions, get to those solutions. And sorry, Joanne, I didn't know if you wanted to chime in. You're muted, Joanne. Sorry.
I mean, any expenditure will either purchase fossil fuel-based products and services or something less non-fossil based fuel. And there's concern that the economy is going to go down if you have this carbon fee, but I think all evidence shows it does not drag the community, the economy down, and it helps offset the burden on our low-income families. And that's the main thing. Of course, it depends on their choices, but we're lucky to have Hawaii Energy and a lot of other groups that are providing ways for our households to reduce their energy costs by becoming more efficient or conserving more energy.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Paul.
Can I comment on this?
Do you mind if I just ask
Okay,
a
no, go
question
ahead.
from Noel Morin?
ahead.
This is for you, Dave. What do you propose as a policy that would be effective in reducing emissions while caring for low, moderate income people, and that is also politically viable? And with this other alternative proposed policy instead of carbon cashback, where has this alternative policy been effective?
Where's that slide at, Sherry? Which one are we talking at?
Below the end one. You want to, yeah, just go up a little bit.
Oh, okay. Well, you can find it for me, Sherry. Basically, what you're saying is, what else can we do? And as I said, in California and 11 states, they have used the law to say that you've got to no longer have gas-powered cars in the state. And so that's one thing. And I said, we have 18 laws or more that mandate that we must follow the law and not pollute. And so also here in Hawaii, what we can do is permitting reform to facilitate the timely rooftop solar development. Right now, it takes up to a year to get your solar panels, and there's this it's a permitting what's it called, Trey?
The solar app.
The solar app, yeah. And so you can get your solar panels on in a they can do it within a day or an hour. The rebate also officially EVs and charging. We need more charging systems all across the state. If you're going to get your solar car, you've got to be able to charge it up, and that's a big problem for people here in Hawaii. There's no place to charge, so that's what's impacting on getting more cars on the road. And we need low interest loans to low and income families. So if I want to put solar panels on my house and I don't have a whole lot of money, then they should get a low interest loan. And then we just need more rebates so that they can just get thousands of dollars off of those panels so they can put them on their roofs. Does that answer your questions?
Thank you. Was that I'm not sure who were you proposing that to, Dave? Okay.
Oh, whoever asked the question, John. Yeah, I hope that answered his question.
Got it. I have a question. I believe it's for Paul Bernstein. It's from Susan Gorman Chang. And she comments first that I see that carbon cashback considers only financial implications. I drove my car when my only child was young because this gave me time to cook dinner, read every night with my son. Yes, his teachers noticed. And oh shoot, when people start posting, it jumps around. I'm so sorry. It jumped off my screen. I apologize, everyone. I have to find the rest of that, but it has to do with and once our son was in high school and my husband retired, then I started to take public transportation. So what about the time factor and its impacts on families, specifically those with children? She says, so that's the question, because she does love public transportation, but it feels like I think the carbon cashback bill kind of is missing the mark for her because it's only financial, not looking at other factors that affect people's decisions regarding whether to take public transportation or use their car. Paul?
So I'm just going to call on McKenna Kaufman, who is a professor at UH and works at UHERO. I think she's better qualified than I.
That's a really great question. Thanks, Paul, for letting me answer it. And it's so the interaction of transportation's really, really important. And it is, I think people have described it as sort of this like chicken and the egg thing. I think that's kind of what you described, Dave. And I fully agree, right? That, you need to be providing people alternatives at the same time as kind of having price nudges in the right direction. And I liked what Paul had in his slides around like the enabling conditions, because I think that's a really critical component when we think about public transit. So just recently, because we finished a study for Oahu and their updated climate action plan. I'm very familiar with sort of bus boarding, so I'm going to give a Oahu focused answer. But, Oahu's bus system used to be an incredibly robust, nationally awarded system, and it's been in 3 decades of ridership decline, right? Despite lots of, really good efforts to keep the system going. And part of it is just, it's just, as you said in the chat, Susan, just so much less expensive to drive your car, right? And when we think about, like, when I teach transportation planning at UH, like, one of the things we talk about are like the positive feedback cycles and the negative feedback cycles related to public transit services, right? That if you, once you're in a system of declining ridership, then you start having lower levels of service. And once you have lower levels of service, it takes longer. And then you have declining ridership, right? And so this is kind of the thing we need to nudge in the other direction, because it also works in the opposite, right? Once you have more ridership, you can increase your levels of service. Once you increase your levels of service, suddenly it takes a shorter period of time, which increases your ridership. So it all works together. In my mind, I don't see carbon pricing and investments in transit as separate. I see them absolutely together and very complementary. I hope that answers the question.
Well, yeah, it does, but in a way, you're putting the onus on the person who's, and there's a lot of single parents out there. I'm not a single parent. You're putting the onus on the people who have the least amount of time and energy and money to suddenly go out there and protest for more public transportation. It just seems like, you're imposing this and then expecting people to come up with a solution when I don't know that they can. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Their options are not, my options are many, but I'm not the average person on Oahu.
I'm going to return the conversation back to Paul if you're okay with that, Paul.
Sure.
Thanks so much, McKenna. I appreciate it. And appreciate your questions, Susan. I think you're highlighting actually one of the reasons why we really support carbon cashback is because, so I agree with you, Dave, about it's an existential threat and it's a climate crisis. And I also agree that carbon pricing, it's not a silver bullet, right? But I think, as McKenna says, it works as a complement. The problem I see with this idea of banning stuff is that burden will fall surely hardest on the people who can least afford it. Just as you're saying, Susan, right? They have the fewest options of what to do. Cannot buy an electric vehicle. They probably can't work from home because they're working in service jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So carbon cashback at least recognizes that and gives money back to them to help these low and middle income households. Other policies, though great to reduce emissions, right, don't do that, right? Instead, if I'm wealthy, I can easily go buy that electric vehicle, right, when you put that ban on. But if I'm not wealthy, what can I do? I have no choice. Gasoline prices go up, and I'm stuck with that same vehicle. So sorry I get so passionate about it, but that's why I just think that if we're going to help the low and middle income folks make it through this transition, they need financial resources to do so. And I'll end with a quote from Representative Keelan. To go green, you need green.
Thank you, Paul. Can I throw out there, if you will indulge me, and then I'd love to hear both Paul and Dave's response to what I have to say. One of the reasons that interested me about carbon cashback was that the knowing and the understanding that our federal government subsidizes fossil fuel, us using fossil fuels. They subsidize it to the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, right? So the feds are falsely making fossil fuels so affordable. And for me, when that fossil fuel enters Hawaii, the thought is, okay, well, let's draw back the curtain, expose the true cost of those fossil fuels, and then so we tax the fossil fuel at hopefully bringing it closer to the true cost. And then my thought was that we would give those funds to alternative to fossil fuel producers, to actually help that direction, because I feel like on some level there might be some imbalance, our support for fossil fuels at the expense of making it harder for solar and all the other methods of energizing our state. But so, and then the idea too is that if we're just giving the resources out to the people and not actually making the investments in a free bus system, a free, more robust bus system, you know, and all these others, maybe having more car share situations available to more people, you know, for free or very much more subsidized costs. I don't like thinking of all these other ways that a government, kind of a more socialist approach to solving problems. Anyway, that's something I didn't hear either of you talk about, the huge subsidies, and then how do we capture that so that it makes the playing field in Hawaii more even for all kinds of energy producers. So I don't know if it's worthy either of your comments.
Okay, I'll go first, I guess. I mean, I think that's really kind of what carbon cashback is trying to get at, right? Because that you hit the nail on the head, right? The problem why we use fossil fuels is they're cheap, right? You make them more expensive, people will use less of them. We'll leave them in the ground, as I agree with you, Dave, right? That's where it'd be great if they were kept. And so if you change that pricing, right, you account for basically unwinding these subsidies, if you will. In addition, there's, you know, all these external costs that we're not paying for either, namely the climate crisis, ground level pollution, et cetera, right? And so for the fossil fuels to actually internalize that cost, to capture it, then that will tip the playing field. I'd also like to add two other things. One is, and I've seen a little bit of the chat, I've tried not to read it, but we need a global solution. And I'll jump, at least from the state level, we need a national solution. So national carbon pricing would be far superior to state level carbon pricing. And global carbon pricing would be the best. That would capture some of these leakage issues that have come in the chat. But also, if we got national or global carbon pricing, this concern about investment, I think, would basically go away. Because now the people who want to invest their money in products or what have you have a huge incentive to put it into renewables, to put it into clean technology or what have you. That is where we're going to get the money. There's far more dollars out there in private, there are far more private dollars rather than government dollars. We need industry to start making the products that we need for a healthy climate and the products that people can afford. Carbon cashback at a national or global level would do that.
Okay, my response is yes, this is the cart behind for the horse scenario. So carbon cashback will never work. It cannot work because people cannot use it. They cannot transition. Once again, you're not going to get even if you got the best case scenario, we're going to get like $1,000 back at the end of the year. You don't have enough money to buy an EV. You don't have enough money to put solar panels on your house. So this system, and also there's no place to charge my EV when I get it. There's no place for me to park it. So the thing is that we have to put in the infrastructure first. It's just what you're talking about, Kim. We should just give free bus passes to all. It will get so many people to ride the bus, and then little by little, we could start raising that price. And we should be focusing on getting as many charging stations wherever we can across the state. And so someone's going to say, well, where are we going to get the money? Which is kind of ridiculous because they spent $15 million on a hydrogen hub that's illegal. They went through the legislature. They were going to build Cop City for millions of dollars. They're going to waste $2 million to sue the kids who are suing the Department of Transportation for not doing anything to cut down our transportation problems with carbon emissions. So there's money there. It's the political will to put it in the right place. And that's where what we all need to do is get together and demand that that they do something. And to say that bans don't work, and we just showed this is impossibly wrong. I mean, this is wrong because California just passed, last year, a mandate that there will be no new fossil fuel cars sold in California until 2030, after 2035. 11 other states have joined in that. So mandates do work. They have worked. That's why we have clean water, clean air, all these other things that we've got that protect us is because of those mandates. Without mandates, without saying you have to stop at this stop sign, not that you can make your decision or pay the cop off a little bit so you don't have to stop. You got to stop so you don't smack into somebody coming through that stop sign. So it is vital. It is important that that's what mandates are all about. And since fossil fuels are not like, just putting a little cinnamon in our water, they will kill us. And they are killing us. They're killing the planet. So they need to be illegal. And at the beginning of that has been with the cars that are happening there on the continent, where they're making it illegal to have gas-powered cars in those states. Plus, we have fuel efficiency standards, and so we're moving over to having cars that are hybrid. Anyway, there's a lot of things government can do. Carrots, giving rebates and stuff like that for solar panels and stuff. These are, not only do you have the mandates, but you have incentives, and people will move towards incentives. Carbon cashback will never, ever, ever give anybody enough money where they can transition from whatever their situation is to buy an EV, solar panels. If they're a renter, there's absolutely nothing that's going to help them to transition over. We have to have the infrastructure first. So free buses or whatever we need to do, but that's what we need to do. How much time do I have left? Am I 3 minutes?
Yeah, I think that's, are you guys, I just want to check in. We have around a half an hour, I think a half an hour more. Is that correct? Yes.
Yes, to 4:30.
And I just wanted to check in. Are Dave and Paul, are you both feeling like you're getting equitable time to share your views? Okay, just wanted to check in. The next question is for Paul, and this comes from Sherry Pollack. Can you share your thoughts on what are ways government can help low-income families with transportation issues? And this is, I guess, the question is, maybe through the bill you created, or I don't know. I'm assuming it's with the bill you're creating. How can the government help low-income families with transportation issues?
I don't know, Noel, if you're on the line, but being an expert in the transportation, if you want to take this and or I can
Sorry,
chime in.
I would love to, but if you can repeat the question, I was responding to Susan Gorman-Chang, and I was not paying attention. Sorry. What was the question?
Sure. The question is, can you share your thoughts on what are ways government can help low-income families with transportation issues?
Yeah, so I think we touched on some of this already, right? Which is a focus on a multimodal system. There are opportunities for us to maximize mass transit, subsidize that, make it affordable. And there are actually already interventions like that here in County of Hawaii. Mass transit is free for all. And that includes getting a ride from your home or, a certain location to the bus stop, and then from the bus stop to your other location. So that's already being done. It's actually funded through some federal grant. So that would be one approach. But, I think here in Hawaii, the communities are fairly, the personal car and truck and all these vehicles are really important. So what's important, I think, is to take into account the fact that electric vehicles are and zero emission vehicles are more affordable to fuel compared to gas cars. They're also more affordable in terms of maintenance. The concern, of course, is that for the low moderate income people, the price points may or have been historically too high, but that's changing. There are many affordable, lower cost electric vehicles today that are at price parity with the comparable sized vehicles. And there's a used car market as well as rebates that allow low moderate income households to adopt. Now, the big challenge, as far as I'm concerned, is public charging infrastructure. And the reason for this is that you know, ideally, if you have an electric vehicle, you have home charging, right? Not everyone lives in a single family home with home charging. You've got renters, you've got apartment dwellers, you've got condo dwellers. So I think there needs to be a lot of investment in public charging for us to be able to support everybody, to ensure that this transition to clean transportation is equitable. So in some, it's not one solution, just like we were talking about here, that there are many policies that have to be enabled. There are many transportation solutions that also need to be considered. And I think what's really important is that we view it from the standpoint of the low moderate income households, so that whatever solution we put in place is equitable and will be you know, beneficial for all.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything you wanted to add, Paul, to what Noel said? Then I'm going to go to a question for Dave. Dave, Joanne Yukimura asked, to what extent do those alternative lower emissions, and at what cost and at what kind of administration is needed? To what extent? Joanne, I'm not sure if I asked your question correctly.
Oh, I was just responding to Dave's answer to someone's question about what alternative would you suggest to carbon cashback for lowering emissions? And he rattled off, which most of them I agreed with, in terms of something good for the community. But I think we have to compare what the impact would be in terms of how many emissions will be actually lowered, what will be the reduction of those suggestions, and what kind of administration is possible and whether it's politically possible. So I just wanted to know what his answer was to those, so I'm referring to the alternative to carbon cashback that he mentioned.
Got it.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
Okay, yeah, great. Well, as soon as you get fossil fuel cars off the road, you're cutting emissions. So the more we get off the road, the more we're cutting emissions. So that's why we need more EV charging stations, etc. The free buses, the same idea. And kudos to the Hawaii Island. Free bus passes. If people get free bus passes to go to work, they're not going to drive their car to work. So obviously that is another great idea. And more solar panels. So all those things I talked about earlier, all of those are direct ways of cutting carbon emissions. So everything that we can do to prevent a gasoline car or help someone get out of a gasoline car immediately cuts carbon emissions. Carbon cashback does not do that. It does not immediately cut emissions. It's going to take 20 years to reduce by 10%, 0.5% per year. That's pretty slow. In fact, it's way, way, way too slow. It's way too little too late. So anything we can do anyway to get people out of gas vehicles. I don't know if Henry or Mike Ewell wanted to respond to that with the rest of my time.
I want
Okay.
Joanne, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Joanne, we can come back to you, but I think
Sorry.
Dave wants to
Thank
share
you.
some of his time with two other people. Mike, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry, I'm in the kitchen trying to put food together, so wasn't expecting to hear my name right now. But yeah, if there's anything specific, Dave, you wanted me to address, I'm happy to help with that.
Well, we were just addressing moving, what can we do to get people out of their cars immediately to start cutting carbon emissions? And I said that we need to, more solar panels, more EV charging stations, et cetera. And I don't know if you had anything else to add to that. Carbon cashback, of course, is going to take 20 years to cut 10%, 0.5% per year. And that's going to be a very, very long time before you're cutting any emissions. So I wonder if you had anything to add to how we can cut emissions politically. And like I said, they're already banning gas cars in California. That's cutting carbon emissions. So anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I love some of the stuff I'm seeing in the chat about, Henry and others were sharing about free mass transit, making things fare free. That's the way to do it. We need to take this, whether it's a carbon fee type of policy or some other type of way of raising the funds. rather than giving people a check back and hoping that they use it for the right things, put it into the infrastructure. Because if I had a check back and I don't have an option to take mass transit somewhere that is affordable or that doesn't take twice as long as it does for me to drive a car, which is my situation, in multiple places I've lived, then I don't have the option. I can't make that happen with my cashback check. But having that infrastructure being invested in with that kind of dollars, those kinds of dollars in a centralized way, will change the system a lot more effectively and make more choices available for people who don't have that funding.
Great. How much time do I have left?
If we're going by the 3-minute rule, I think that might have been 3 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. Moving
yeah.
on.
But I'm looking for questions for Paul now. Joe, do you have a question for Paul? Or do you just want to make a statement? I know you've been patient. And I know you asked the question about how do we afford the solar? Free solar panels, but how do we afford that? You're muted. I'm not sure if somebody needs to unmute Joe C.
I wanted to make a statement about it's kind of a response to some of the folks talking about, we need to use carbon cashback funding for solar panels or for EVs because people can't, otherwise they can't afford them. But I think the nice thing about carbon cashback and the hard thing for some people to accept is it's a two issue thing. If people can do whatever they want, it's not really, the funding isn't intended necessarily for people to invest it in an EV or solar panels. People, the lowest income people some of them are going paycheck to paycheck and they need food, they need money for rent, they need money for healthcare. And we don't want to force them to buy an EV if they don't have to. If they need the money for their basic necessities or then that's their choice. And I think that's the true nature of the progressivity of this bill. And usually, when environmentalists come up with a bill, it's all environmental. And a lot of places like California, they take the money and they use it for EV programs or for solar panel programs, and they get a lot of criticism for not being progressive and not, even with the subsidy, it's hard for people, for low-income people to use it, and some people don't want that. I was part of a group that helped develop in California some of their zero-emission vehicle programs, and we went down to the low-income communities in the ports of Los Angeles and asked them, hey, which of you want solar panels? Do you want zero-emission vehicles? And a lot of people said, just give us money. We understand that you want to go green, but we have real imperative needs in our day-to-day life. And the higher prices of carbon will have the impact of reducing emissions. And if we want to use, if the higher price of gas makes us want to buy an EV, maybe that with some government funding will help. But people have a real need, and this is an opportunity to have an income just redistribution from very high income and frankly tourists that come here and have very high intensity energy use, and have that money go to lower income people to meet their basic needs. So
thank you, Paul. I appreciate your patience.
You're muted, Kim.
You're muted, Kim.
Thank you, Joe, for your patience. And is there any response from Dave or Paul to that statement?
Joe will be taking my place from here on out.
Well, I said it before, that carbon cashback, giving people money back as prices are rising, isn't working. Canada, they're having a big revolt in Canada right now. 62% of the people in Canada say, get rid of this tax. We don't want it. It's not working. Prices are rising too much and we can't afford it. So, and they're nowhere is it actually working anywhere. So it's a theory. It sounds really good, and make the polluters pay and then give the money back to the people so they can afford. But as you're raising the prices with the tax, people are not able to actually, respond effectively to that because they're not going to get money to deal with it. And so once again, we're putting the cart before the horse. We've got to first cut carbon emissions, so carbon cashback will never cut, there's no proof at all it'll ever cut carbon emissions. None of the places where they're doing it right now is that happening. In fact, they're cheating. As we showed you in Sweden, they've reduced their carbon emissions from fossil fuels to their, but they're to the 25% less than it was before, but they've expanded the use of trees and such. So it's 70% more carbon emissions coming from trees and such. So they've actually not done anything to cut their emissions. It's really creative accounting, and that creative accounting is very bogus. They also use other means to hide the fact that they're emitting, and all the countries that are using carbon emissions, cutting their carbon emissions this way with offsets and carbon trading and all that, they're used to pretend that they're cutting their emissions, but they actually are not. And the studies show that, and that's what I showed you, that study, 37 studies, she's peer reviewed, she's looked very well, and they made sure that none of those studies have come out very well ahead.
So I just want to confirm, Dave, and then I'll lead into Joanne's question. I think your slide stack showed 2% reduction at the most. Is that correct? Over the period of 13 years or something like that. But Joanne's question regarding, just having a ban on, how long will a ban on gas cars in Hawaii take? So looking at the time trajectory, say of California, California has this plan to ban cars, but I'm assuming after it bans the car, there's gonna be a huge decrease or lessening of greenhouse gas emissions. So looking at the two trajectories of carbon cashback and its impact on greenhouse gases versus California's ban on gas cars. How do those two look in comparison in terms of, because one of your criticism is how long will it take to see the reduction of greenhouse gases through the carbon cashback? And so if you can compare those two. It is for you, Dave. Because that was Joanne's question to you in terms of comparing how long it will take to do a ban on gas cars versus the longer term impact of carbon cashback. Yeah.
Well, the ban, I mean, they're saying 2035. So they all new cars at that point. So they've kind of started the ball rolling. When will we get all cars off the road? No one's done a study on that. So I can't answer that. But we do know that if we provide the infrastructure, then people will get off of fossil fuels because they'll have another alternative. If you got a free bus, you're more likely to take that than put gas in your car if you can do it. If you can get solar panels on your house cheap, then you're going to do it because you're going to cut your cost for fossil fuels. So yeah, I think that does that answer the question?
No.
Oh, why don't you? What am I missing?
I think you were talking about that particular. That's one example of a ban, but that's not the only thing happening. There's other actions that are happening. Other initiatives happening in government. So that's just one example.
Yeah, right. I mean, the car ban is one thing, but also by banning other things that we may have to ban, because we can ban them, and it has worked, and we do that. So we need anyway.
I don't understand. I don't see the legislature passing a ban on gas cars in the next 5 years, and we don't even have 5 years, right? So, and my figures, and please help me, Noel or others, show that British Columbia's drop in emissions have been significant. If there's not been a total drop, it's because been a population growth, and the per capita drop has been distinct and real. Over 10 years. So I don't think it's true that carbon cashback does not drop emissions. If it does drop emissions, I I don't know what else will drop emissions without a total system change. As somebody who started the public transportation system on Kauai, it's been like pulling teeth to get the bus to become frequent, convenient, and usable, user-friendly. And look at rail, the biggest capital project in the state, in the history of the state, and it's $75 per trip is the actual cost. And yes, you can make it free, but that's not the solution. The solution, doing right design and not having corruption in the decision-making process. But the thing about carbon cashback is it doesn't allow that much corruption because it lets the market work. And yes, Henry, I don't like the market most of the time, but in this case, when you do the correction to the market, you correct the price to represent the true price of carbon, it will work without anybody else having to do anything. It's just by the choices people make. So I don't know of any other proposal that's so efficient and potential for passing. And I also have different information. The information I saw was 60 to 70% of the population supports carbon cashback in Canada. Those low-income families love having the $1,000 a year or whatever they get. It makes such a difference. We saw what happened during COVID when they got cash. So anyway, I'll stop here.
Thank you, Jen. I'm going to go to Paul and then to Mike, who if that's okay with Dave. First, it's Paul. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to see if we can shift the conversation a little bit here, and you don't have to answer, Dave. But I'm just curious, since this trying to understand where people are on carbon cashback. Are you saying that you're opposed to carbon cashback even if we could get the policies that you wanted? So let's say the government, all the policies you listed, the government legislated those. And then somebody came in and said, I'd also like to add carbon cashback on top of it. Would you be opposed to that as well?
You're talking about instead of giving the money to the people, giving the money to
No. I'm saying you get your wish. You get your wish. All the policies that you listed when people were asking you, all those policies go through, right? All those policies are on the books. How do you feel then if also somebody said, I want to put on, we got all your policies, Dave. I want to add carbon cashback to that list. Are you okay with that? Or at that point, you're still opposed to the idea of carbon cashback being layered on to all the policies that you would like?
Well, one of the big problems, of course, is you're not counting biofuel
Wait, Dave, sorry. You've gotten all the policies you want, so you can add the biofuel.
I'm sorry. I actually, as moderator, I do want to avoid cross-talking. No, and I do want to give Dave an opportunity to answer the question in whatever way he wants to answer. And then I think to Mike for a quick comment. But Dave, finish your response.
Well, let me give my time to Mike because maybe he has a better answer than I mean, I think I've said it so clearly, and I don't know how many times I can repeat the same thing. But go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Dave. So first of all, if we got all the policies that we ideally wanted, then there would be no political will for carbon cashback because there will be no need for it. It will be totally superfluous. But the problem, one of the fundamental problems with the carbon tax or carbon fee, whatever you want to call it, type of structure is that you're taking a certain part of the energy sector and punishing that, but that's not the only sector that is bad and polluting. So you've got biomass, biofuels, hydrogen, waste incineration, all these things that are often worse, almost all of them, worse than the equivalent fossil fuels for the climate, but are exempted under these policies. And so when we say things like Canada's emissions went down, well, did they really go down, or did they do what we're doing in the US where we largely switch from coal to gas, where the smokestack emissions that we count are lower, but the actual greenhouse gases are much higher because of all the leakage that we don't count. So there are so many false solutions and measurement problems in these policies that are not being addressed, not to mention exemptions where in most of these policies, the military and the agricultural sectors are totally exempted. So it's hard to even call this a solution when oftentimes we're moving from one problem to a different problem, and on paper it looks like a solution because we're not measuring things correctly. I'd rather see things like RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standard structures, that say we're going to move from where we are to these specified clean solutions within a specified time frame, so we don't have to hope that the market's going to do the right thing in the right time. And then the battle is just over what are the right things. And in RPS, we have bills we're working on making sure that the burning of trash and trees is not going to count. And that's where the battle needs to be, not hoping it happens in the right way in the right time when there's no guarantee of that.
Thank you, Mike. We're 4 minutes till ending this discussion. I want to give Paul 2 minutes to closing remarks, and then 2 minutes to Dave for closing remarks. And I apologize for all those who didn't get their questions asked or answered. But I really appreciate everyone's time here. So Paul, 2 minutes.
I first would just like to thank everybody who attended today. And my sincere hope is that people have a better understanding of carbon cashback and other policies that are discussed, and can, with this knowledge, can start making decisions on which policies they would like to support or not support. That was the goal of this event. Given all the back and forth and what have you, I'm more than happy to answer other questions. I can put my email in the chat, as well as you're welcome to reach out to the Carbon Cashback group. I appreciate hearing the, I think Dave and Mike, I agree with you. You bring up important points, and this goes back to carbon cashback is not a silver bullet. I agree. We need the other policies. I think this is a policy, though, unlike all the other policies mentioned, true policies that do help the low and middle income folks find money to, help them with daily living or what have you. But anyways, again, thank you everybody for joining. I hope you got out of it what you wanted to get out of it. And if you didn't, again, I'll put my email in the chat and happy to continue the conversation. Aloha.
Great. I first want to thank Carbon Cashback folks. You guys have been incredible in your organizing. I mean, it's one of the greatest organizing feats I've seen. You're dedicated, hardworking, and I just appreciate all your efforts in trying to do something about climate change. So nothing that I said here today was a put down in any way, shape, or form. I just look at facts and figures and numbers, and that's where we're coming from here. As I said earlier, we are already in a climate crisis. We cannot wait for 0.5% per year reduction in carbon from carbon cashback. It's way too little too late. We have to get as many cars and off the road and solar panels on rooftops and wind going, free buses, whatever we can do to get people out of those cars as soon as possible. There's no proof at all carbon cashback is working. As I said, I don't know where Joanne got her information from, but a recent study was just done in October 2023. The majority of Canadians are not happy. Now, I don't know if she was just doing one province or whatever, but the entire country, the majority are not happy with carbon cashback. And it's because they have a lot of carve outs. They're letting they're letting some of those different folks not pay the tax, and or some things are carved out, some of those different pollutants. So we just have to get off as quickly as possible. I think we're all working together as a team to do that. I appreciate the fact that we have such a great team of climate activists working together, and I'm really grateful that I know all of you. Thank you very much.
With that, thank you. On behalf of the Chamber of Sustainable Commerce, I want to thank everyone, both panelists, Paul Bernstein, David Mulinix, for educating us and helping us think critically about these issues and these solutions and the impact. But what is certain is that it feels like everyone on this Zoom meeting is committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the most impactful way. So thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate it. And the panelists hang out and the organizers hang out, and we'll say goodbye to everybody else. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim. Should have
Thank
said that at the
you.
beginning. Thanks so much. Great job moderating.
Brilliant, Kim.
Thank you all.